Are we ready? Okay. So, good morning. Let me continue with our previous discussion on Buddhist research methodology. What I did basically in the first discussion was to give you some background about Buddhist research. And also we discussed in somewhat detail what is the new knowledge in Buddhist studies and how to produce a new knowledge in Buddhist studies. And also I discussed what is research and what is not research. So these are some of the things we discussed last week. And then you had some interesting questions. Then we discussed how academic study of Buddhism started. Now, this is basically what we did last time. Today, before moving into the next aspects of Buddhist studies, I would like to draw your attention to some readings. History of Buddhist Studies in Europe by De Jong. He is an Australian scholar, very well known in the world. There is a very small book on the history of Buddhist studies in the West. I think you can download it because it's a fairly old book now. You can download it from internet, and then you all can read that. That's a very interesting history. And then there is another book, State of Buddhist Studies in the World, edited by Donald K. Swearer and Sompon Ponta, published by Chulalongkorn University, Bangkok in 2000. This is a collection of papers of a conference on this theme, the state of Buddhist studies in the world. I presented the paper on the state of Buddhist studies in Sri Lanka for the last 25 years. Last 25 years means 25 years before 2000. So roughly starting from 1975. But in my paper, I tried to trace the history of Buddhist studies in Sri Lanka even before that. So this book contains several chapters on different countries and different locations. I'm not exactly sure whether there was a chapter on Myanmar. But anyhow, try to access that book also. That's now it's fairly old book now, 18 years old, so it should be available in the net. I don't know whether any hard copies are available around, but otherwise it is a good book. You can write to Chulalongkorn University and get it to the library. So which discusses basically the history and the nature and the extent of Buddhist studies in the world. So when we are studying Buddhist research and research methodology, it is very good for you to know what is happening in the world, what is happening in the other countries in the world in the name of, say, Buddhist studies, and what kind of research, what are the emphasis they have, right? So I don't have time to go into all the details because, in different countries there are different scholars who are doing different types of Buddhist studies. And it would be very interesting, another even a research topic for someone to study the history of Buddhist studies in this country. History of Buddhist studies from the very, very early period up to this period. So it is basically, it can be a historical study, okay? So I don't have a memory whether there was a chapter on Myanmar, but I may be wrong. So you could check this book. So these are some of the readings we can consult. And then let me begin today by discussing with you different ways of studying Buddhism. So this will be basically, I am looking at the larger map of Buddhist studies. Now, studying a religion from inside, being a part of what is studied, by being a believer, or from outside as an outsider, being a non-believer. Then I introduce these two terms, esoteric and exoteric in religion. And we will also have a little discussion on comparative religion and interreligious studies. Now, when we study Buddhism, we are studying a religion, right? We are studying a religion. And then, particularly, of course, in this context, when you are studying Buddhism, you are studying your own religion, right? We as Buddhists, when we do Buddhist studies, we are studying Buddhism as our own religion. The religion we believe in, religion we followed. So, there is an interesting thing. Now, suppose you are studying geography. You don't have that much of an identification with you. You don't need to identify it with you. Maybe you are studying geography in Switzerland or some other country, or geography of India. So, there is no personal connection with that, right? That there is not that much connection. So, you can even study the geography of Myanmar, but without getting much involved personally, right? But, in some studies are different. For example, suppose you are studying politics, and if you are a part of that political party, then of course, it is very close to your heart. Now, religion is something like that. When we study religion, we are studying here religion of our own religion. The religion we follow, the religion we believe to be true, right? So now, interesting thing is in Buddhist studies, when we do Buddhist studies, we need to look at these perspectives. We are studying something from inside, being a part of what is studied, by being a believer, and or from outside as an outsider, being a non-believer. Now we have these two terms, esoteric and exoteric. Now esoteric in religion, particularly when the anthropologists and the religious experts, when they study religion, they introduce these two terms. Esoteric means internal, exoteric means external. Now in religions, usually there are certain things internal. One way to understand that would be, in a religious system, there can be certain things that are limited only to the members. Outsiders cannot see or access to those things. Now, those things can be considered to be esoteric. Say, for example, as Buddhist monks, when you perform your uposatha, lay people are usually not admitted, right? So that is more internal thing. Something like that. There can be certain things where each and every person cannot come. So there is a limit you can go. Now in Sri Lanka we see some shrines for different gods. So before God there is a curtain. So you can't go behind that curtain. Of course we don't know what is behind the curtain, but all are not allowed to go behind the curtain. But there can be few people who can go behind the curtain. But everybody is not allowed to go, right? Now that's an example for this esoteric and exoteric. So what is accessible only by a limited number of members is what is called in religion esoteric. Then exoteric means external things. Now in a religion, basically there can be things that people can see outside. For example, when there is chanting, public chanting, everybody come and see that. If there is a procession going on on the road, then everybody can come see that, right? So there are, like that, there are certain things that everybody can see. Now in the monastic life, anyone can see you here. But when you go to meditate or when you go into your room, people cannot see you. So, there is always a limit. Now, esoteric and exoteric in religion is, esoteric means internal, exoteric means external. Now, there is this distinction between religions, and in many other things there can be this distinction. However, this distinction is basically understood to be applicable to religion. Now, how it is applicable to studies? Now, in study also you can study your religion, because you are studying a religion, as an insider, as a person who believes, as a person who follows. Or somebody can study religion as a non-believer, as a complete outsider. Now, interesting thing is the two researchers can have two different perspectives. Now, when you are approaching the subject as a believer, as a person belonging to that religion, there are certain things you will not question, right? There are certain things you accept them to be true. Now, in my earlier discussions, I discovered that suppose you are firmly believing in Buddha Ghosha's commentaries, then you don't like anybody to question them. And also in your studies, you don't question them. You may be studying Buddha Ghosha to see what he has said and to know his ideas, all these things. But you are not questioning really, right? You don't have a doubt, because you start with some kind of saddha, right? So the limit of your study can be decided by that factor, because you are an insider. Okay. Now, on the other hand, being an outsider means you don't believe in that. However, suppose you believe in some other religion, then believing in one religion, when you are studying some other religion, sometimes you can be prejudiced against that religion, because you believe your own religion to be true, but here you are studying somebody else's religion. Now, you can see that when we try to study a religion as a part of our research, this is one of the main problems that we are encountering. How are we to study a religion? Okay, either you study it as your own, or you study as not your own. The difference in approach can be very important when we set about doing a research. In fact, now this subject called comparative religion, British are not Buddhist, but of course then they encounter Buddhism, what people do, the pagodas and all these things, and quite a lot how British people looked at Buddhism in Myanmar, and there were a lot of issues. There was a very well-known issue because British refused to remove footwear when they enter into the Buddhist places. Do you know about that controversy? Have you read about it? Okay, if you have not read about it, there was a huge controversy in this country because British refused to remove footwear when they entered into sacred places. But on the other hand, Burmese thought that that's very bad because you should remove the footwear. So that is our conventional belief. But if you are coming from a very cold country, there is no point, doesn't make much sense to remove your footwear. But on the other hand, British were now here in this country. So, now when this, particularly the colonialist rulers, when they encountered the religions, that was a curious phenomena for them, something very different from their own religion. So, the subject called comparative study of religion started basically interesting thing is, in the ancient world, people did not study other people's religion, or people did not study other religions. What is the main reason? I think the main reason is because you believe that your religion is the true and right religion. Correct? And then why do you have to study wrong religions? Because if your religion is the true religion, other religions are false religions, right? So why do you have to study false religion? You simply, you don't study. Simply you don't study because there is no need. Because you think you have the right religion, so why should you bother about other religions? Now, when you read the Buddhist literature, we can see that Buddha lived in a country, a social situation where there were so many religious beliefs. So Buddha knew about these beliefs and Buddha had to discuss, that was the situation. But later what happened was, now for example, particularly after the 10th century, this country became a Theravada Buddhist country. Anything else. Sri Lanka became a Theravada. Not want to study anything else. Basically because they thought that, there is no need. There is no need for them to study any other religion. There was no need for comparative religion actually, because, and also furthermore, sometimes they thought that if the other religion is Micchaditti, so studying Micchaditti can be a papa. You are accruing papa by studying Micchaditti. Because you think that others are Micchaditti. Why do you bother about Micchaditti? And then, if at all people started other religions those days, they studied simply to find fault with those religions, to find what is wrong with them, to maybe criticize them, to encounter them in a debate and defeat them. So, there was basically no need to study other people's religion. If at all you studied other people's religion, you study because you wanted to attack them, right? But here, with the comparative study of religion, there is little bit difference. Now, comparative study of religion started with some curiosity in the minds of those colonial rulers. They encountered something new. They encountered something different from their own religion. But they believed that their own religion is the greatest. And then they wanted to know more about these native religions in the countries they came. So always they had a very, fairly low estimate about these religions. But then still they thought they should know about these things. Now sometimes it so happens, a study of other religions started in order to understand these people so that you can rule them more efficiently. Now for example, when British came to India, and India was such a huge country. Although it came under Britain, Britain is relatively small compared to India. So it is a huge country that came under the rule of British people. And then they wanted to, it was a huge challenge for them to rule this country. And then at some point they thought that, they should better know the culture, right? In fact, it is very interesting when you look at the British history of, the Indian studies. Initially, the Indian studies, Sanskrit studies started in those contexts, not because they loved, they had a love affair with Sanskrit literature or Vedic literature. They simply wanted to understand people whom they are ruling so that they can rule them properly. Now you know about this huge Sanskrit dictionary, Monier-Williams dictionary. You've seen that, right? Okay, I know that you are not studying Sanskrit very much, but when you go to study Sanskrit, you know that the Monier-Williams is the one who really authored this huge Sanskrit English dictionary, okay? That was published in the early last century. And why they spend so much money is not because they had some kind of love towards this language, but simply they wanted to understand the culture and the people who follow these things. So the Sanskrit studies in, I hear, Oxford University was started for that. So you see why these studies started, particularly in the Western context. because they wanted to study, not because they really loved these things, but simply because there were other, the motives. Same thing for the religions. So they started studying religions, although they thought that these religions are very low compared to their own religion, they wanted to know the people. So that is how they started. However, we know that things change subsequently, their attitudes change subsequently. That's a different part. But when we talk about studying a religion, you can see that studying a religion can be a different thing from any other subject. Okay, do you see that point? Studying a religion can be different from studying mathematics. Studying religion can be different from, because when you study mathematics, you don't have anything personal about mathematics, right? You just study mathematics, that's all. And then when you study geography, or when you study chemistry or physics or any subject, there is nothing personal about it, no personal relation. But when you study religion, particularly when you study your own religion, then you accept it before you study. You believe that it is true. So, by that, your limit of and the nature of your study is determined by those factors. In fact, you study by being an insider. Now, interesting thing is, while believing a religion, can you become an outsider and study? Can you go out of your religion and look at your religion from outside? Now, that's a very difficult thing, because you are born and brought up to be a Buddhist in this case. Believing that Buddhism is the true religion means from your internal perspective, from your inside perspective, subjective. Objective means you look at particular thing as an object lying outside from you. So you are kind of dissociated from that. The object is there. You are not a part of that. You study something away from you. Like that. Can you dissociate yourself from it and study it as objectively, just as an object? It is difficult. Because, we are Buddhist and we have been born and brought up as Buddhist and we believe it to be true. So just for the sake of study, there is a difficulty of dissociating us. When we talk about the Buddhist research methodology, we can think of Kalama Sutta, taught by the Buddha to the Kalamas. Now in the Kalama Sutta, Buddha says that do not accept anything simply because it is your tradition, simply because it's your teachers. There are 10 conditions, right? 10 conditions based on, Buddha says that don't accept simply because it is your tradition. Ma anussavena, and so on and so forth. And Buddha says simply accept when you know that it is to be kusala and it is to be akusala. Attanava janeyat. That is the word used by the Buddha. Attanava janeyat. Kalamas, when you know for yourself, you accept it. But do we do that in Buddhist studies? Do we do that in Buddhist studies? No, usually, in the Buddhist studies, in the traditional Buddhist studies we don't do it. Why? Because we have been brought up to accept that, the Buddhism is the true religion, what the Buddha said is the true thing. So, but interestingly, what the Buddha said in the Kalama Sutta is, in fact, Buddha said to Kalamas who were not Buddhists. Anyway, right? Buddha had always speak to people who are not Buddhist. But the Kalamas were very particular that they said that they don't believe in any religious teacher. So they didn't have any religious beliefs. So Buddha taught Kalama Sutta to Kalamas who didn't have any religious beliefs. So Buddha said that don't accept anything until you see. But our situation is different because we have been born and brought up in the Buddhist tradition. So we accept it to be true. So when we study these two perspectives, insider perspective and outsider perspective, these two perspectives, I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but what I'm saying to you is that when you study something, there are certain things you see and certain things you don't see. And in the same manner, when you study religion as an outsider, there can be certain things you see and there are certain things that you don't see. Suppose somebody comes totally outside of Myanmar and observes a religious ceremony here. Do you think they understand everything? No, anybody can see what is going on, but it is an important question to raise whether they really know what is going on, whether they really know the meaning of what is going on, So it's not very easy. So looking from inside, your view can be something. Looking from outside, your view can be something. So both inside view and outside view may have, the certain issues, certain advantages and certain disadvantages. Okay? It could be varying, depending on the context. So, comparative study of religion and interreligious studies, as I said, started very recently for different reasons. But basically people wanted to know about other religions, as I said earlier, in order to criticize, find fault with them. But more recently now people study religions out of kind of curiosity to know what it is and also to compare. And also, as I said, when the colonialist rulers came into these countries, now we look at different types of Buddhist studies and methods. Different types of Buddhist studies and methods. There are different types, and then like textual studies, philosophical studies, conceptual studies, comparative studies, historical studies and sociological studies. I'm just talking about different types of Buddhist studies. And then we have anthropological studies, cultural, linguistic, and also there can be others. There may be combinations of these methods such as socio-historical method or types of studies, philosophical and linguistic, or socio-linguistic, socio-anthropological, and the like. And finally, importantly, there is a question, is there one right way to study Buddhism? Now, here I listed several types of Buddhist studies. We are studying Buddhist studies, we are doing Buddhist studies when we study Buddhist texts. Now, that is called textual study of Buddhism. And then we have philosophical study of Buddhism. We study Buddhism or Buddhist teachings from a philosophical perspective. I come to each of these categories again in detail. Then we have conceptual, like we take Buddhist concepts and we study the nature, characteristics, and the interconnectedness of the Buddhist concepts. So that is what is called conceptual study. And comparative study, we study comparatively between two religious systems or even within the same religious system, between the two different concepts or two different sects and so on. So we compare. To do a comparative study, you have to have at least two or more, right? And then we do historical studies. Simply we study the history of Buddhism, history of Buddhist countries, And as I said earlier, we can also study the history of Buddhist studies in different countries, and sociological studies. Now, sociological studies, we are studying Buddhist societies, what is happening in the Buddhist societies, how they have incorporated, Buddhism. So this is called Buddhist sociological studies. And then we have anthropological studies. Anthropology means a study of human types and human societies, human groups, their behavior and their psychology. So it's called anthropological studies. And the cultural studies, we can also study cultures that have been created with the influence of Buddhism, like Burmese Buddhist culture, Sri Lankan Buddhist culture, Shan Buddhist culture, Japanese Buddhist culture, and so on. Culture means how the doctrines and the practices have been incorporated into the culture of society, how cultures have been created. And then the linguistic studies. Linguistic study means you can do Buddhist studies simply for the linguistic analysis based on the language analysis. Maybe linguistic analysis can be Pali analysis, Sanskrit analysis, early Myanmar language analysis, or it can be anything. Because we have source languages like Pali, Sanskrit, Prakrit, Apabhransh, and all these things. And then we have ancient classical Chinese, Tibetan, and ancient Burmese, perhaps ancient Sinhalese, those languages. And also we have modern languages. So the linguistic studies. And also there can be combinations of these methods. I mean, although I listed separately, now you can have a sociological and historical study of some Buddhist aspect, or you can have a philosophical and linguistic study of some Buddhist aspect, or socio-linguistic, you can have sociological and linguistic, how the language and society, or socio-anthropological, society and human types, and the psychology and psychological factors. So you can also combine many different things. Now what it means is simply Buddhist studies, you can have textual, philosophical, anthropological, sociological, like that, each different types. Or you can combine one or two, then you are combining several different methods together. Now, Reverends, this is very important when you do research, for you to know what type of research you are doing, in which category is it included, and then what are the specific research aspects, what are the specific methods you follow in those things. So to think of those things is something very important. So in my discussion with you today, I would like basically to go along with these categories and to see how we do these Buddhist studies, and then what are the specific requirements for each type of Buddhist study to conduct, okay? And then this last question I have raised, is there one right way to study Buddhism? I raised this question basically because in particular traditionally, we are used to do Buddhist studies through the text. Basically what you mean by Buddhist studies is basically you study the text. Now particularly in this country, if you take Buddhist studies, when you are studying for Dhammacharya, usually if you look at your syllabus is basically text, right? This part of the text, this part of the text. So you are doing basically Buddhist studies through the text. Now ultimately when you study all the Tripitakas, maybe you are Dhammacharya or even higher than that, but then what you have done is you have studied the text, you have memorized the text, you know how to give the Burmese meaning to Pali words, so interpret them. So basically you are doing Buddhist studies particularly through the text. Now as a result, many of us think that the best way to do Buddhist studies, or sometimes even the only way to do Buddhist studies, is text. But here I will show you textual method is actually very important. But textual method is one method among many methods, okay? That is not the only method. There can be many methods. So textual method is one method among many methods. But of course, particularly in the traditional Buddhist countries, we are basically focusing on the text. We memorize text, and then we translate text, we study text, and we base everything on the text. So therefore there is this somewhat misleading view that people believe that textual studies is the best. Or in some other context, people could believe that there are the other studies are more important than a particular study. So, but I think the right approach would be to accept that there are different methods of studies. So textual method, philosophical method, and so on. So next we will go into details of each of these methods, and to see how we do Buddhist research according to these different methods. Before moving into that, do you have any questions or anything on the things I said so far, or should we move on? Yeah, if you have say anything, say it to everybody so that we can share it, and then have. Okay. While you formulating your questions, of course we can ask questions at any time. We will move to textual studies of Buddhism. Do you have any questions? Anybody? Okay. Now, what is textual studies of Buddhism? I just immediately spoke to you about textual studies, because usually our Buddhist studies are mainly textual Buddhist studies, right? And then also we think that textual Buddhist studies are the most important thing. But what are textual Buddhist studies? How should we do? What are the issues and what are the problems? Okay, now editing, transliterating, translating, constructing or reconstructing texts is meant by this category. Now when you say textual studies, textual study can be editing a text, transliterating a text, or translating a text from one language to the other, constructing the text. There can be instances where your text is lost, so you try to construct it. Or reconstruct. There can be constructed text which is not satisfactory, you are reconstructing. So all these are really what we mean by academic textual studies. But traditionally what we do usually is we memorize the text, right? Actually, memorization of text was needed in the ancient times because there were no written text. That was the main reason. And the written texts were very scarce, so people had to memorize. That is the main reason for memorizing. But apart from that, although there are written texts, it is good to have things in your memory. So it improves your memory. So there are other good aspects also. So basically our studies was we memorize the text. And then whatever the memorized text, then we try to give the meaning. In your case, you memorize the Pali text and then you try to understand in Myanmar language, right? So that is what basically we do. However, when we talk about research study, memorizing is not what we are talking, okay? Because I'm not saying that memorizing is not good. Memorizing is very important. I hear that in the Asanga in 1956, there were several Myanmar Buddhist monks who memorized the entire Tripitaka. Now, that's not an easy task. Your mind has to be like a computer, like get it from, wherever it has been stored. So it's a very important thing. However, when we talk about the textual studies in Buddhist research, we are talking about not memorizing or the memory of the text, but editing the text, transliterating the text. Now you edit text, you transliterate text, or translate text from one language to the other. Your construct or reconstruct in the text is meant by this category. Sometimes, certain Buddhist texts, I think even my yesterday's discussion at some point I mentioned, there are certain Buddhist texts only available in Chinese translations. Chinese translation was done from Sanskrit text. Now, there are certain efforts by scholars. You look at the Chinese translation and try to construct the original Sanskrit version. Now, that is not very easy, but you study Chinese translation and then you try to construct. Okay, this must have been the original Sanskrit. Now, same thing can happen with Tibetan translation, because many Tibetan texts, Sanskrit texts were translated into Tibetan. But today we don't have the Sanskrit version, we have only the translation. Now, from translation, if you can get back to Sanskrit translation, that is constructing a text or reconstructing, which means that there is a constructed text, but it is not satisfactory, then you try to reconstruct it. But this is a very, very interesting academic exercise academically. If you know classical Chinese very well, or if you know classical, like Tibetan very well, and then this particular term has been translated into Tibetan, but the term usually is this. And constructing a text requires then content, Dhammana, poetry. In 19th century, there was this great monastic Buddhist scholar called Ratmalani Sri Dharmarama. By his time, he lived in the last part of the 19th century. Janaki Harana Sanskrit version was lost, but he had found only one Sannaya. Sannaya means word by word translation. Okay, Sannaya means, in singular we say Sannaya. Sannaya means word by word translation. So, of course, Sanskrit word is given, but with the single meaning, but not the poetry. So, what this learned monk did was, based on that Sannaya, he constructed, which is not in a way difficult, but on the other hand not very difficult, because the Sanskrit words are given. Because Sanskrit words are given in the Sannaya. Like, when you give the meaning of a gatha, that gathas don't have exact like sentence. So, gathas words are mixed. But then, when you give the meaning, you arrange the words according again. So, this monk only had the Sannaya, that type of Sannaya, and based on the Sannaya, he constructed the Janaki Harane. And then later, after several years, in India they found a copy of the Kavya, actual Kavya, and then when they compared the two things, they found that two versions were very, very similar. There were minor differences. Now that shows that this venerable monk, Ratmalani Sri Dharmarama, who constructed the text, was very clever. So that's an example of constructing a text. Either you have only a Sannaya or word by word translation, or only you have some kind of, the translation. Based on that, you construct a text. Okay. So that is one type of textual constructing a text which is already lost. Or you edit a text, translate text into a what is transliterate? Transliterate means, okay, you write a text from one character. Like say, for example, you find a text in Burmese character, then you write it in Roman, English character. Then it is transliterating, which is not a very difficult thing, but of course still it takes time, because if it is for the first time you are doing that, it takes time. So transliterating will not be suitable only to get your degree, but that will be only a part of your research, but still it is an important part, transliterate. And then you have the translating a text from one language to the other. That also comes in textual edition. And the most important of all these things perhaps is editing a text. You have a text and you edit the text. Because, the need for editing text arises in the ancient times. You have basically manuscripts. Manuscript is basically handwritten text. Now, when you look at the handwritten text, some texts have been written very nicely by educated people. Some texts have been not written very nicely, and that they have been not written by educated people. I mean, if you take a large text like a Majjhima Nikaya or something, for one to copy that text in a palm leaf would have taken several years. So before you study the text, you have to write it down, right? But then writing it down may have taken several years. So there can be a lot of mistakes sometimes. There can be memory loss. You really forget certain words to write. And then maybe the writer, the person who copies, is not a very educated person. So, the writing text, copying text in the ancient times was very, very difficult task. Sometimes, the copy of a text is, available only in one monastery. That monastery may be located several hundred miles from your own monastery. So you have to go there and you have to get the permission, live there for a long time and then copy it slowly. Which is not a very easy thing for people to do. And I remember in Sri Lankan Buddhist tradition, I'm sure it may have been the same in the Burmese tradition also. They consider to copy a Buddhist text is to be a very good punya karma. Okay, so people, in order to acquire merit, people copy. So what they do is, they would maybe copy one page. So the other text, so there can be lot of variations, lot of mistakes, right? And then the copying text in ancient times was a very, very difficult thing. Actually, Burmese letters are the most round letters I have seen in the, I think, whole world. They are so beautiful. But to write Burmese letters beautifully is not very easy. Every letter is a circle, right, in Burmese letters. So it's not easy. And so whatever the palm leaf manuscript you get can be with a lot of problems. So how are you going to edit a text? How do you know that which is the most important text? This is a very, very difficult task. Now, luckily today, by now, we are living in the beginning of 21st century. Lots of Pali text from the the palm leaf manuscripts have been edited and copied down, transliterated, but still not all. I don't know the situation about Myanmar, but in Thailand, there are some organizations who collect Thai manuscripts, and then they have collected so many manuscripts. There may be a lot of books that still are not published. So people will have to look at them, read them, and But today, of course, textual editing, we are using a lot of modern machinery, not very difficult. Now, those days you have only the palm leaf, but today we can photograph the palm leaf, and then we can enlarge it, and we can do all sorts of things, and we can make use of modern machinery to do that. Ancient days it was not that easy, but anyhow, editing a text is something very important. Have been edited, but still there is quite a lot of room for need for editing text. Okay, so we will move on. Now, next thing is, what is a critical edition of a text? What is annotated edition or annotated translation of a text? Now, these two terms, critical edition and also annotated edition or annotated translation. Important concepts to understand. Critical edition is when you have a text and suppose you have several copies of that text. Okay. Now, say for example, say we are going to edit Anguttara Nikaya, then we have gathered different texts from different areas of the country, and what is the critical edition? Critical edition basically means you can't just look at one orally, if the texts are similar, then you don't have to worry. But if there are differences, then you mark all the differences. Sometimes editing a text can be a group work. Now one person has the main lead manuscript. He read the sentence, and then maybe there are 6 or 7 people with other Olaleaf manuscript, and then each person can read that sentence in his or her thing. And then if there is a difference, we can give names to each manuscript, like whatever name, short name. So according to that short name, you can mark the difference. Okay, such and such a manuscript has this reading to this word, this reading to this word, and go on. Now you see that can be very slow, time-taking, but very important process, because you read one sentence and all the other people also look at that sentence in their manuscript and see whether it is the same or not. Now if there are differences, then of course you mark the differences. Okay, so you go on reading the text like that. So you take one text, one copy, and you compare that copy with maybe several other copies from different areas of the country or region, and then we go on marking those things. So what happens is basically in the printed edition, sometimes you see something like this. So you have the lines here going like this, and then suppose this particular word here is different, it has a different reading, so we call one text is A1, A1 has this word, and then A2 we call something, it has this word. So like that, for this particular word, we mark what is called, these are called variant readings. So you have the lead manuscript, and then for this particular word in the lead manuscript, there can be 2 or 3 variant readings in other manuscripts. So you mark down all these various manuscripts. So when you finish one leaf or one page of one manuscript, one page, then you may have so many variant readings for so many words. You write down all these things, okay? You write down all these things, and then, okay, the first part of the research is that. That's not very difficult. That's a very technical thing. Anybody can do that. You look at the text very carefully, you read it, and others read it, and you just mark the differences. That's all. That's the first part. However, the most which word or which reading is more accurate than the other reading. Okay? Now how can you do that? Now first part of the thing, you can get a group of people to do that. If you are doing the researcher, maybe you can get whole set of friends, or you can get, if you can pay, you can get research assistants to do your work. You collect those variant readings, but to determine which term is true or which term is not true, your research team can't do that. That you have to do. In order to do that, you have to have a good understanding of the language, good understanding of the subject matter, if it is a Dhamma text, about the Dhamma, and so on. So that is a part of your expertise. So suppose you are editing a text for your MPhil degree or PhD degree, you are getting your degree not simply for collecting variant readings, okay? Do you understand that? You can simply collect variant readings with the help of other people. And it requires only to go to places. Okay, you may have to go to from here to Yangon to get one manuscript, and then go to Shan State to get another manuscript. Right, lot of traveling, lot of money, lot of physical effort. Okay, but ultimately your contribution is not by those things. Your contribution is, it has to come through your knowledge, through your understanding, through your language knowledge. You have to decide which of the variant readings is more acceptable, better. If it is a Dhamma thing, then you have to understand it, you have to determine which is better or which is not better, right? So the editing can be a long, arduous process, requiring a lot of knowledge. So it's not easy. Now, as we know, a lot of books have been edited. But of course, that maybe some of these things have been edited very well. Some of the texts have not been edited very well. So there is a requirement, there is a need to re-edit those things that have not been edited. So editing can be, first it can be very time-taking thing. Secondly, it can be also requiring a lot of knowledge about the text. Not only about the text, even the various ways of writing in different areas, even those things. Because from different periods, people may have been using different types of inks, different types of techniques of writing. So even that type of historical knowledge is also needed for you to do a textual study. Okay. Now suppose you are not doing any more it with palm leaf manuscript, but you are doing it with other printed manuscripts. Even with the printed manuscripts, you can do textual study. Suppose you are doing some kind of textual Pali study, you can take the Chatta Sangayana edition, Pali Text Society edition, Sri Lanka Buddha Jayanti edition, Laos edition, and Cambodian edition, and then you have several 6-7 editions. Now not palm leaf manuscripts, but printed. But even with the printed things, you can do a similar study. Okay. So textual studies are, in that sense, very important and interesting, but time-taking. So the critical edition of a text is that type of thing. So when you edit a text critically, you record all the variant readings. Sometimes, some scholars select whatever they think the most suitable variant reading, and then they construct the text. But some scholars simply what they do is, suppose there are 6 manuscripts of the same book, they select one manuscript to be the lead manuscript. So they take that manuscript as it is and then record the variant readings only. You are not constructing the text. Do you see the difference? Say there are 6 manuscripts, you take one as the lead manuscript and then only record the variant readings. But some people go beyond that. What they do is they look at the variant readings of all 6 manuscripts and then they determine, okay, this term is the better term, this term is the better term. So incorporating those things, they construct a new version of that. So 2 ways to do that. One way is to just to have one version and relative to it only record. Now what is the meaning of recording these things? What is the meaning of recording variant readings? Actually the meaning is that as you did your own research, someone else also can look at what you did and think when you record the variant readings, that person can also determine which reading can be the better reading. Suppose you want to interpret something the way you like, then you can make use of some of those variant readings to give your interpretation. So the marking variant reading is not a waste of time. Now for one thing, there can be several variant readings, and when you mark them, others can look at the variant readings. Okay, now this is what Chatta Sangayana says, but the PTS edition is different. So why? Like that you can compare and contrast and make the meaning. So that is why we in the critical edition, we record all the variant readings. So critical edition of a text means you mark the variant readings, and then you can have a discussion. If you think that a particular term is the most suitable term, not the others, you can give reasons, you can have a discussion. Now that is your contribution to the study, okay? Otherwise, anybody can take a text and, just mark the variant readings, and if the story is over, no, then that is not very much new knowledge. But if you see certain term is much better than other terms, then you can say why you think that term is more important. Okay? So, critical edition is not only noting the variant readings, but also have a discussion about why you think certain term is preferable to other readings. Okay? So that involves your own knowledge, your own creativity. Now if you know Dhamma better, language better, history better, then you can argue that, okay, out of these terms, this must be the better word, more suitable word. I mean, you can't simply say this is better, you have to give reasons for that, right? You have to give reasons. So in order to give reasons, you have to have knowledge, so therefore you are contributing to it. So that is the critical edition. And then we are talking about the annotated edition, no annotated translation. Annotating and critical, the variant readings is, there is a distinction. Annotate means you provide additional information, that is annotation. You take any concept and you have a discussion and you provide extra material, that is annotation, okay? So annotated, the discussion is annotated, so you can have a translation with annotations, or you can have an edition with annotations. Now the basic distinction between two different things is, like when you say you are editing critically, you look at several texts and representative text, and then you mark the variant readings. However, when you select these texts, you can't just take, if you are doing this in Mandalay, you can't just go to a couple of libraries in Mandalay and do that. That's not very, okay, but not enough. But suppose you can get the same manuscript copies from a couple of 100 miles away, and like that in the entire country, because in fact, scholars can trace the genealogy of a text. If you look at carefully, okay, somebody must have copied this text first, and then it was in Mandalay, and then somebody came from Yangon and copied it and took it to Yangon, and somebody came from Shan to Yangon and copied and took it to Shan, and from Shan somebody came from Thailand and took it to Thailand, like that. But ultimately you must be able to see, okay, this is the original text, it went here to there, and then maybe when it into Yangon, so many people copied it, so in Yangon you get so many copies. But of course your copy you can get from Shan state can be very different, or the copy that went to Thailand can be different. So if you want to do really a good study, you must not take only the copies from one place. You can see the genealogy, history of the text, who copied what. Sometimes, palm leaf manuscript can last several centuries, right? Several centuries. Like in countries like Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Thailand, with humidity, texts don't last too long, maybe a couple of 100 years. But in cold climates, texts can last more than 1,000 years. Without any problem. So, it depends. And trace the genealogy of the text. Some kind of, when you are into textual edition and when you are so familiar with the text, you can really determine what text is older, what text is not older. Like sometimes texts have covers. By looking at the painting of the cover, you can sort of decide belongs to, what time that cover belongs to, which period that cover belongs to, okay, the material used. And sometimes, also text have information about the person who copied it. So the person who copied it finally writes, I am the so and so in such and such a place who copied this. That information you can use to determine, where the person, where the text was, and, so on and so forth. And so it is not very easy thing, but, it can be a very interesting historical survey to determine the text. So you critical edition, you do that, and then annotated edition means also you provide beyond marking the variant readings, you also give lot of information, discussion. That is annotating, okay? So annotation means giving more details. So you can make annotated edition or annotated translation. Then how to select a text for editing or translating, and what is the criterion? Why do you select a text for translating? Suppose you are doing a textual study, you are a textual study student. How do you select a text? Why do you select a text? Now, one major reason can be if there is a particular manuscript that has never been printed or edited, that's a good enough reason. And then also you are lucky as a researcher, because if you could locate a manuscript that has not been published at all, so then you are the first one to publish it, right? Then, you are in a way lucky, because your job is not that difficult. Not that easy, but of course it's not that difficult. So then you select a text. But today, suppose you are doing textual edition as your MPhil or PhD research, it's not like those days. Say 100 years ago, there were so many texts unedited and unpublished. But today, most of these texts have been edited and published. Then what? How are you going to do textual research? In fact, the fact that these texts have been edited and published doesn't mean that there is no room for you to re-edit them. Because there can be originally some people edited them, but it can be full of mistakes. So you can look at the text and you can do that again. So you do the re-editing. I know something about Pali Text Society. Pali Text Society started publishing Buddhist text at the end of 19th century, after 1880. But by that time, how much Pali the English people know, how much Pali the world knew by that time is very little. Rhys Davids, who started Pali Text Society, he was a former British civil service officer in Sri Lanka. He studied Pali from a Sri Lankan Buddhist monk, and he went to India, back to England. He took some, olive books, and, he started publishing them, editing and publishing. But the initial PTS, Pali Text Society editions, are not very good according to their own judgment. But this is not an insult for those great people who did that. But, we have to simply understand that textual edition was at an infancy during that period. People did not know language very much. Okay, but nevertheless, they published those things. They printed those texts. It's very interesting. Pali texts were printed in England in Roman letters much before in Sri Lanka they were printed in Sinhala letters. I don't know the situation about Burma, somehow or other, because Europeans had access to Pali text much before. But those editions were not perfect. Now, as a result, PTS is re-editing what they did, re-editing their earlier editions. For example, I know one Sri Lankan scholar, Professor G.A. Somaratne, he edited the first part of Sanjutta Nikaya. Now, he re-edited it. So, the Sanjutta Nikaya had been edited by PTS before, at the turn of the last century. But then, about now I think 10-15 years ago, this scholar again re-edited it. So you can have editions, you can have re-editions, okay? You can have editions, and if the edition is not perfect, if the edition is not complete, then you can have re-editions. So editions can be, how to select a text or editing, translating is that. Same thing for translating. Now there can be many translations. Now that doesn't mean that you cannot do a new translation. Again, we can take an example from Pali Text Society. Pali Text Society translated the Majjhima Nikaya, Digha Nikaya and all these things into English at a very early stage. However, by today, there are new translations of Majjhima Nikaya. The Pali Text Society translation is done by I.B. Horner, I think, Majjhima Nikaya. And then more recently, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi retranslated, not only Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, actually it was Venerable Jnanaponika who translated, and Bhikkhu Bodhi re-edited it, Middle Length Discourses of the Buddha. So the initial translation was called Middle Length Sayings of the Buddha, now Middle Length Discourses. And then subsequently Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi translated Gradual Discourses of the Buddha, Connected Discourses of the Buddha, and then Long Discourses of the Buddha was translated by Maurice Walsher. So all Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, Sanyutta Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya have been retranslated into English. So initially they have a Pali Text Society, not very good. Okay? If you can show that that translation is not very good, then we can retranslate it. So these are basically the ways of how you should select the text. Okay, folks, I have spoken more than 1 hour. I think we will take a short break of 10 minutes, and then I will allow you to ask questions about what we discussed. Okay, we will wind up for time being. Thank you.